So first, one quick who we are, Master Gardeners. This talk is in, we're collaborating with MMWD. Master Gardeners are trained, non-paid members of the UC Cooperative Extension. We answer inquiries and provide research-based information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices. So here's what we'll cover today. First, we'll answer that question, what is a native plant? We'll talk about why they matter and where they are and which we recommend that you plant, and a little bit on how to care for them and where to learn more. So let's start with the basics. What is a native plant? Well, it turns out native plants have some things in common. They've co-evolved over a very long period of time with animals, fungi, microbes. And this is not just in, for a couple of decades. These are plants that have been around for hundreds and sometimes thousands of years. They grew in California before our European ancestors arrived. And the very first Californians depended on them for food, for livelihood, for medicine, shelter, everything. That really was what they relied on. And importantly, they are the foundation of our native ecosystems. So some bacteria, fungi, bees, so many living things depend on our native flora for survival. Without our native plants, some would not be here with us. So this is a photo of the rolling hills in Marin in springtime. And I am among those who often will say, oh, it's so beautiful, it's so green, it just looks so lovely. And it does, there's no question about it, that's a beautiful look. The truth is that most everything we're seeing there plant-wise, in terms of the bright green, is our exotic, what we would call exotic weeds. In other words, those are plants that have been brought over, grasses, from people who came in after with the missionaries and so forth, and grazed their animals and so forth, and brought in weeds that sort of overran some of our native plants. So I like to think about what it would have looked like before some of those things showed up, right? Here are some of our big blooms that we'll have down in different areas of California, and it's just so incredibly gorgeous, these blooms. Of course, you recognize poppies there at the bottom right. The wildflowers that we see coming up now are really survivors, right? They've withstood the test of time, and they've overcome some of these invasive weeds. So I thought I would just show that as a comparison. So here are a few facts about native plants. California has more native plant species than any other state in the country. We have 8,000 native plants, and of those, 1,000 grow in Marin. We are an incredibly varied county, topographically, everything, and so it's suitable to a lot of plants. 40% of California's native plants are found nowhere else on the planet. So that is a pretty astounding statistic when you think about it. And they exhibit some really interesting traits to accommodate dry conditions, right? And I'm sure you probably all are aware that we live in what's called a Mediterranean climate. And that means that it's not a question if we're going to have a dry summer, a long extended dry summer into fall and so forth. It's that's just the way our climate is. There are only 5 places on the planet that have this type of climate. To give you an idea how incredibly valuable those 5 little places are on Earth, even though it's just, I think something like 2% or 5% of the land, it holds 20% of all the flora on Earth. So it's pretty impressive. But let's move on. Here are some of the things, the ways that California native plants have adapted to our conditions. And they most have to do with leaves and roots. So we find that a lot of native plants have real fine little hairs on the undersides of leaves, and this helps insulate them from heat. Or they have small, tough, leathery leaves that help reduce evaporation. Gray color, you'll see in many native plants, it has kind of a gray tone. They will help deflect the sun. Many, like this Manzanita in the photo here, the leaves are held vertically to reduce exposure to the sun. I have some Manzanita in my garden. I always like looking at that. It's so intriguing to me. Some will curl up in hot weather to reduce sun exposure, very smart. Or many will grow very large leaves to capture water in the wet months, when we hope we have the wet months, right, in December, in winter and early spring. And then they grow really small leaves in hot, dry months to conserve water. Plants are so smart. And some drought deciduous plants will drop leaves in the dry season to conserve energy, and they kind of go into this dormant state until the next rainfall. So some really cool adaptations there. And then in the roots, some will grow very shallow roots to take advantage of early rains and every drop of moisture. And they will also have these incredibly deep tap roots to access groundwater. And here, like we can think of, say, oak trees, right, that they have this combo. Okay, so why grow California natives? And there are many important reasons. The first is they are certainly a cornerstone of an earth-friendly garden, which basically just means a sustainable garden. They conserve water. Many prefer little or no water once they're established. They're low maintenance. Since they're naturally acclimated to our climate and soil and insects and everything else, they don't need pampering, so that's a selling point. They don't require chemicals. Many have developed their own defenses, and we're going to watch a little video in a few minutes where you will hear about some of that. And so by using less water and by using fewer chemicals and so forth, it helps mitigate climate change, our ultimate environmental problem. And of course, using native plants creates a sense of place, and it protects our precious biodiversity. So let's talk about that word just for 1 minute. Biodiversity is the variety of living things that naturally coexist in a specific area. So for instance, let's say like I have a garden that's, native plants or whatever. Actually, let's look at a more extreme example. If I suddenly decided I'm going to take out all my plants in my garden and I'm only going to get things native to, I don't know, pick any place, New Mexico, also a dry area in the summer. Some of those might grow and thrive here. Again, we can grow so many things because of our sublime climate and so forth, but I wouldn't necessarily be adding to the biodiversity of this area, right? That's a different area. Every area is unique and each species in an ecosystem plays a role. Our blend of our native plants, animals, insects, microorganisms, some things you can only see with a microscope, things underground. Anyway, these things are only exist in Marin, right? This combination. It's sort of like our environmental fingerprint, our thumbprint, I should say. So very incredibly important. So we like to grow native plants to help keep California biodiverse. We are the most biodiverse state in the United States. There are a number of reasons for that, having to do with the size of our state and the incredibly varied topography and all the different ecosystems in our state. And even though we're among the most biodiverse regions of the world, there are definitely threats. 30% of our native species right now are threatened with extinction. Pretty scary. Habitat loss is the primary cause of biodiversity decline. So every time there's a new parking lot or building or house or anything that goes up, of course, that takes away space for habitat for all of the living creatures. And that's why putting them in our own garden is so important, right? We help fill in some of that missing space. In the next 100 years, climate change is expected to shrink the range of most California endemic plants, those that grow just here, by up to 80%. So these are all blinking yellow lights, right? Cautionary tales. Okay, so like people, native plants live in communities. So let's talk about those a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the most, the largest plant communities in Marin. The first is the coastal sage scrub, and you may recognize some of these plants right out of the chute. This is our most common plant community, very diverse. It's adapted to our long dry spells that I spoke of earlier, and also fog, right? So you'll see some of this right on the coast. They need well-drained soil and full exposure to the sun. One interesting little tidbit, there really are no trees in the coastal sage scrub. They need full exposure. They don't want necessarily to be under the shade of something. So here you can see some of our lovely California lilacs, the Manzanitas with their gorgeous bark, the California fuchsia, currants. This is a photo with the yellow flowers is one of our currants. The wormwood, the artemisias. I think I already mentioned the California lilac or the ceanothus down here, bottom left, and coyote brush, the buckwheats. It's just an incredibly varied and beautiful plant community. Next we'll talk about is the central oak woodland. These are in the drier areas of Marin, around we have some near Mount Burdell and Mount Tam. Often there's an understory of grasses and lower growing perennials. This was our a very predominant plant community years ago in California, but much of it has been replaced by weeds, like that photo that I showed you earlier on. And of course, this is dominated by our gorgeous oak tree, which are just so incredibly valuable. Can't say enough good things about them. We'll talk about oaks in a little bit more depth in a minute. So many gorgeous things. The madrones up here, the coffee berries. This is toyon in the upper right. The sticky monkey flowers, or I now call mimulus or diplicus. Just a gorgeous plant community, and it really just exudes California, or at least that part of California. And then we have the mixed evergreen forest, or riparian areas, which means near water. And these are our Redwood Groves, and I'm sure you all know that Redwood Groves are very limited in where they grow. These are our forests. They often have a thick mulch layer at the bottom. I know if you've walked in the floor of a redwood forest, that layer of duff can be so thick, and they need that. All of these plants coexist in this type of environment, usually damp year round, often with streams and creeks running nearby. Many of these plants prefer partial shade. This is the home of redwoods and some gorgeous ferns, the iris, like these purple iris right here, the columbines, they're interesting flowers, upper left here. They're just absolutely gorgeous plants. So that's another plant community. So here's a picture of probably the coastal scrub here in summer. And you can see how we all know how this sort of just tans out, right? In the summer, it gets that tawny color. And again, this is a look of California, right? This is what we see when we go on hikes and so forth. And it's a beautiful look. And it's part of the reason why, why we live here, for these wide open expanses and so forth. Often we're often geared toward wanting to improve something, right? So we sort of, we add things for color and so forth. And I certainly don't have anything against any of these plants. But sometimes by adding things and in the process taking out some of our native plants, we actually are losing things, right? And a lot of that has to do with all of the creatures that coexist with our native plants. So extend our native environment into your garden to help create a corridor for wildlife. Native gardens are beautiful and protect our biodiversity. And here's just a smattering of some of the incredibly beautiful native plants, or for those who just prefer more of a green planet, a subdued plant palette. That's doable too, right? This photo has native plants and, nothing blooming at the time. And everybody has their own likes and dislikes. So that's a doable thing too. So here's the question. Does growing native plants, can we really make a difference, right? And the answer is a resounding yes. And what I'd like to do is play this 15-minute video for you that will summarize, excuse me, the importance of natives. And this is given by, excuse me, Dr. Douglas Talame. He's actually on the East Coast, and he's a PhD in entomology, I believe, and a professor, and does lots of speaking on this, and has written a few wonderful books, which I'll leave in the resource list, which will be available afterwards. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and run this. Please, if anyone has any problem, if it's not loud enough or something, please let me know.
Summary of it today. So Dr. Talame, let me turn it over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Yeah, this will be the Cliff Notes version of what we talked about last week. We're talking about restoring the little things that run the world, and those are insects. Why they matter, what we can do to save them. We really have two choices in this world. We can create landscapes in which nature thrives, and this is an excellent example. I believe it's Kathy's garden. Or we can create landscapes that are ecologically dead. I see an awful lot of that where I live here in the East. The first option is going to sustain us, but the second one will not. So to restore nature, we have to restore the specialized relationships that are nature, because that's what it's comprised of. And likewise, if we want to restore insects, we have to restore the specialized relationships that sustain them. And that is a lot of specialized relationships. We need to do that because there are so many animals that depend on the specialized relationships that insects have with plants. And this is just one of them. This is the chestnut-backed chickadee, one of the chickadees in California. And a lot of people think of them as seed eaters because that's what they're doing during the wintertime. They certainly do eat seeds. But when it comes time to reproduce, they can't feed their young seeds. Young chickadees cannot eat seeds, so they switch to insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. And it turns out that the chickadees are not exceptions. Most birds are rearing their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. And that's because caterpillars are essential to most of the food webs that we have out there, because they transfer more energy from plants to other organisms than any other type of plant eaters. So we need caterpillars, not just for birds, but for almost everything else. They are not optional parts of our food webs. They are essential. How many caterpillars do we need? How many does it take to make a clutch of chickadees, for example? And keep in mind, chickadees are a tiny bird, about 1/3 of an ounce. Well, to make a Carolina chickadee, it's 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, just to the point where they leave the nest, and then they continue to eat caterpillars afterwards. A similar sized bird, your Wilson's warbler, brought 4,000 caterpillars to the nest in just 5 days. So most birds are feeding their young thousands and thousands of caterpillars every day. As a matter of fact, 96% of all terrestrial birds are rearing their young on insects. And again, most of those insects are caterpillars. So no caterpillars, no insects, no baby birds. A bit of an exaggeration, but not much. Which means we have to create landscapes that are capable of producing the diversity and abundance of insects that we're talking about here, again, particularly caterpillars. So how do we do that? Well, we have to consider the specialized relationships between insects and plants if we want to have those insects. The reason most of the insects are specialized on particular plant lineages is because plants don't want to be eaten. They want to protect their tissues from insects. So they have loaded them with nasty tasting compounds, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, which is why it's green out there. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat the plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most plants. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. About 90% of the insects that eat plants can only eat particular plants. They can only eat the plants that they have shared a long period of evolutionary history with, during which they have developed specialized adaptations that allow them to get around those chemical defenses. They developed enzymes and behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that allow them to eat these plants without dying. Monarch butterfly is a perfect example. We all know it as a specialist on milkweeds, and milkweeds, of course, are toxic plants. They're filled with cardiac glycosides and sticky latex sap. But the bright side of specialization is that the monarch now has the ability to get around those defenses and eat milkweeds successfully. There is a downside to specialization, though, and that is that now that's all monarchs can eat. They're so specialized in milkweeds that they haven't spent any time developing the adaptations to eat anything else. So we have 2,137 native plant genera in North America. Got a lot of non-native plants in there too. And monarchs can only eat one, the Asclepias. So if you take Asclepias out of the landscape, you're going to lose your monarchs. That's the result. And of course, California is in very bad shape now with their monarchs. It declined 99% since 1976 because of the loss of milkweeds. And there are a lot of reasons for the losses. You've had droughts, you've had fires, but habitat destruction is simply removing the milkweeds is certainly a large one. Now, it's not just birds that need these insects that need these caterpillars. It turns out that most of the creatures out there are tied into insect food webs in one way or another. So all spiders need insects, other insects need insects. Our frogs, our toads, our amphibians all eat insects. So do our lizards, so do our bats, so do our rodents and our skunks and our possums and our raccoons. And a lot of things we don't think of as insectivores rely on insects as well. Like our foxes, the red fox, 25% of its diet is insects. 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. So it doesn't matter how big you are, you still need insects. And even if you don't eat insects, you need insects. This is a sharp-shinned hawk. It's a bird predator. And of course, it needs insects indirectly because the birds it's eating needed insects to become birds. Same thing with our snakes. This is a garter snake. It's eating frogs and toads, but the frogs and toads needed insects to become snake food. So a world without insects is a world without biological diversity. And the renowned E.O. Wilson told us way back in 1987 that insects are the little things that run the world. And if we were to lose them, we would lose our flowering plants, 90% of them anyway, which would drastically change energy flow through terrestrial habitats. And that would collapse the food webs that support our animals, our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere would rot as opposed to having insect decomposers rapidly turn over nutrients. You'd only have fungus and bacteria left. And humans, of course, would not survive any of those changes. So insects aren't optional. They're absolutely essential. But we have ignored Wilson's warnings. And that's why we have headlines like this: the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, EO told us what it means, and it's not good. Washington Post says that the UN report suspects that 1 million species will face extinction in the next 20 years. And most of that million species are insects. And they're getting it. Humans will suffer. And by the way, that's the projection, but it's not an option. We cannot lose 1 million species in the next 20 years. So we have to do something about it. Causes of insect declines include misuse and overuse of pesticides, that omnipresent habitat loss, certainly the profligate use of non-native ornamentals that do not support our insects because they haven't had the ability to evolve those adaptations to the non-native ornamentals. Invasive species, so many of our ornamentals have escaped, and now they're the primary invasive species in our countryside. Security lights, roadside mortality, climate change. There is some good news here, and that is if I move climate change out of there, the first 6 causes of insect declines are easily reversed, and they're easily reversed by individuals. So there is hope. What's happening to the insectivores that are out there? Well, the ones we care about are birds. They're our charismatic megafauna these days. And we now have 3 billion fewer breeding birds than we had just 45 years ago, with 432 species of North American birds now considered to be at risk of extinction. Not good, not good news. So I'm proposing that our only viable option is to learn how to live in ecological harmony with the natural world that sustained us. In other words, learn how to live sustainably with the natural world that sustained us. Living unsustainably doesn't last very long. How do we do that? Well, we have to put the right plants back into our landscapes. Which plants would they be? One of the things we've learned in our lab recently is that all plants are not created equal in supporting food webs. And it's not just native versus non-native. There's only 5% of our native plants that are making about 75% of the food that drives food webs. And I've called those keystone plants. So I want to emphasize this is one of the most important points of the talk. And that is, there are huge differences among native plants and their ability to support food webs. So we want to use those most powerful ones. So for example, oaks in California support 270 species of caterpillars. Eucalyptus only supports 5. So, you know, you love your eucalyptus, but it's not a very productive tree in that regard. Your native Prunus support 246 species of caterpillars. Zelkova supports none. Ceanothus, your lilac, 93 species. The talk has, this is a very handy graph that Mike made. The green bars are native plants that are used often in homeowner landscapes. The red bars are non-native plants that are used, and on the y-axis there is the number of moths and butterflies that each one of those plant lineages supports. So obviously the green ones are a whole lot better in terms of driving food webs than these red ones. And these first 2 bars, that's what I would call keystone species. They're much better than the other green bars. So we want to make sure that these guys are in our landscapes. Where do we find out what these plants are? If you live any place else in California, you could go to Native Plant Finder, the National Wildlife Federation, and put in your zip code, and a ranked list of woody and non-native plant, or woody and herbaceous plants would pop up for your county. It doesn't work real well in California because you have huge counties with several biomes in each one. Fortunately, the Native Plant Society has created a tool called CalScape, which is much better than this tool, and I wish every state had a CalScape. Where you can actually put in your exact address and it will tell you the plants that are appropriate for your area. Very, very powerful tool. Another important issue here is that there is room for compromise. And this comes from the research that my recent PhD student, Desiree Narango, did with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, DC. She compared chickadee reproductive success in areas that were dominated by native plants and areas dominated by introduced plants. And this is all in suburbia, by the way. And without spending the time to go over her results, I will tell you that the primary result is that if you have 70% or more native plant biomass in your yard, you can have sustainable chickadee or bird breeding populations, which means you can have up to 30% of your landscape non-native plants, as long as they are not invasive. So you can have the most beautiful plant that you absolutely need without destroying the entire food web. If you have these powerhouse plants that comprise about 70% of the landscape. And to me, that's good news, because if my message was you cannot have any non-native plants, very few people would be looking at it. So what we need to do is rebuild the Earth's carrying capacity, its ability to support life. And that comes from the amount of plants that are in a given area. So we have to put the plants back. We as humans go around and just kind of take plants out all the time, replace it with concrete and other things, lawn. And then the lower 48 ends up looking like this. So where are we going to do this? We want to do it everywhere, but we cannot ignore privately owned land. About 78% of the entire country is privately owned. 86% of the East is privately owned. So we have to use private properties, because if we ignore them, our conservation areas will be too small and too isolated in order to function properly. We've gotten ourselves into this mess because we have thought of plants only as decorations, because they are decorations. But for 100 years, we went to the nursery and we bought things based on aesthetics without any thought to the ecological value that those plants need to start performing where we live. And when we landscape with plants only as decorations, then you're talking about ecological destruction. This is a pretty landscape, but it is not a functioning ecosystem. What we can do is pick pretty plants that are native and do supply all of the ecosystem services that we need to start they need to be delivered from functioning ecosystems right in human-dominated landscapes. And when we add function to the criteria that we use when we select plants, then landscaping equals ecological restoration. And this is 21st century landscaping. We've done 20th century landscaping, and we're now in the 6th grade extinction. So I would like to give this a try and try to turn that around. I want to end by talking briefly about a book that E.O. wrote, E.O. Wilson, 2016, called Half Earth, where he said that if we want to preserve life on the planet, and I presume we all do, we need to preserve ecosystem function on at least half of the planet. And he talked about the science that supports that. Well, a lot of people want to do that, but they're scratching their heads. How can this possibly be? Half of the planet, the terrestrial planet Earth, is now in agriculture, and 7.8 billion people with all the infrastructure stuffed in the other half. So how can we have ecosystem function there? Well, I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation. The old approach was we had this notion that humans and nature cannot exist. We have to toss that notion, because coexisting with functioning nature, with functioning ecosystems now is our only option. So that puts the ball squarely into our court. As property owners, as people who live in cities and can help manage nearby parks and preserves, we have the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. None of us are going to be able to fix it alone, but we can fix it if we all work together. And that was my message last week.
Okay, so I think that is an incredibly succinct and valuable way to show the incredible importance and value of native plants. So let's move on and talk about some of those keystone species that Dr. Talamay mentioned. And we're just going to go through these relatively quickly, but these are all plants that work beautifully in Marin, are native to our area. And so let's jump in. Here's just a smattering of those keystone, many of those keystone plants. They're just so gorgeous. So let's start with the habitat hero here, the California native oak trees. They're just incredible trees. So let's talk about what they provide. Biodiversity. They are among the most biodiverse ecosystems in California. They are visited by hundreds of insects, birds, animals, you name it. They provide food for more moths and butterflies than any other plant in our state. They help mitigate climate change because of the girth and how hard the wood is. That helps sequester carbon. Helps clean our air, again, because of the girth of oak trees. They absorb a significant quantity of airborne pollutants. And they also help clean our water. They absorb fertilizers and pesticides, excuse me, and other trace contaminants that run off into soil. And that stops our water. It helps reduce the pollution that lands in our water. That's an incredibly valuable service they're providing. They help control erosion. The large tree canopies, and especially the dropped oak leaves, help prevent soil, because when it rains, it buffers the pounding on the soil. And so that helps prevent erosion. It enriches the soil. In fact, the soil under oak canopies is incredibly high in organic material. And this increases its carbon storage capacity, again, carbon sequestration. And I just want to mention there how incredibly important it is to leave those dropped oak leaves. And we'll talk about that in 1 second. And of course, there are all those other important benefits. They provide shade and shelter, increased property value. I mean, you know, when you when you look at a gorgeous oak that's near a home or so forth, they just add such incredible beauty and value. They provide fuel, food, and recreational activities. It's hard to say anything bad about an oak tree. And I love the thought that they start as these little tiny acorns. It's just a beautiful thing. So a couple of precautions when gardening near oak trees or living near oak trees. And I will tell you that most of these things have to do with what not to do. So let's run through those real quick. Don't disturb the roots. You want to keep the area from the trunk of the tree out to the edge of the canopy. That area is called the root zone. You want to keep that as natural as possible. Avoid heavy foot traffic, certainly no parked cars, trenching, construction, anything that smushes or, you know, in other words, compacts that soil or raises the grade of the soil is very damaging potentially to oaks. So like even just like paving underneath an oak, you don't want to do that. You want to have like gravel or other surfaces where rain and where water can soak in, slow down, spread out underground. Really important. Don't remove the drop leaves. This is what I was mentioning earlier. The fallen leaves support zillions of microorganisms that help protect oaks from disease. All of the life underground and within those leaves are just so incredibly important to the health of the tree. Do not want to irrigate an established oak tree in summer. Oaks want it wet in winter and dry in summer, the California oaks. The bark is not adapted to summer moisture, and wet summer roots are just waiting. They're very vulnerable to disease. And often oaks will die within 10 years if suddenly we turn the irrigation on them in summer. Do not fertilize oaks. They typically don't need it, and it can stimulate excessive leaf growth and then encourage pests who want to come and chomp on that leaf growth. Improperly applied, also, it can injure the roots or burn the foliage. And finally, don't overdo the pruning. This is especially on mature oaks. They typically don't require much or any pruning. You want to prune them very judiciously and only during dry weather when the open cut wounds are less susceptible to infection. And you want to remove as little foliage as possible and keep the cut small. The best time to prune deciduous oaks is when they're dormant in winter. Okay, next, he talked about Prunus alicifolia. By the way, you're going to hear me use often the botanical names for plants. And I always add a little mention here that if you're in a nursery, or especially if you're ordering plants in a nursery or looking at tags, always rely on the botanical name. There's only one botanical name per plant, but there are many common names often per plant. So really important to be specific, or you might end up with something you don't want. So just a little warning there. Any rate, the Catalina cherry, or Prunus alicifolia leonii, is an evergreen shrub or tree. It can grow 15 to 30 feet tall and wide, but it's easily pruned to shape or control the size. Makes an excellent, beautiful, dense evergreen hedge. Has these great looking showy white flowers in springs. I grow this and you can hear the bees and all the wildlife on it. It's just wonderful. It gets this dark red purple fruit in fall. The cherries, so to speak. The birds will probably beat you to those, but you know, not that you want to chow down on them. They're really for the wildlife. They attract beneficial insects, butterflies, a host of beneficial, again, insects. They're drought tolerant. They is resistant to oak root fungus, and just an absolutely beautiful evergreen plant. And then our currants. This is a Ribes sanguineum glutinosum. There are other ribes, other currants. This is a semi-deciduous shrub, so it's going to lose some of its leaves in in winter. It's around 5 feet tall and wide, sometimes a little larger. has showy pink flowers, as you can see here in late winter and spring. Hummingbirds cannot stay away. And then when those flowers turn to a seed, the birds just go after the seeds. This one grows beautifully, say, under the outside edge of the canopy of an oak, because they like that sort of dapple sunlight. They're drought tolerant in coastal gardens. In inland gardens, they might need a little bit of supplemental water once established. They're native in California on the north and central coastal areas. And this one is such a beauty that, you know, it's suitable even for formal gardens, just a stunning plant. And then, of course, there's our lilacs, the Ceanothus, of which there are many, and you've probably seen these around. They're just, some are blooming right now. Most have passed blooming. They're spring bloomers. They're evergreen. They are absolutely glorious plants. I mean, come on, look at that color, right? It's just so gorgeous. There are many cultivars, from little ground hugging 2-inch plants to, you know, 15 or taller foot trees. They make outstanding hedges or just knock out focal points or ground covers. They like sun, and they also like lean and well-drained soil, but some cannot actually take clay soil. They want little to no summer water. I will tell you a quick story. I planted one of the Ceanothus called Ceanothus Dark Star. It's a readily available plant. It can be a hedge, but it really wants to grow into sort of a smallish tree. At any rate, I planted it when it was, I knew there was a lot of rain coming. This was some years ago. And I planted it, and it just pounded rain for, gosh, like it was one of those crazy times where it rained every day hard for like a week or so. And then I never watered it again. I was experimenting, and I wanted to see how this would work, and you know, how, so to speak, tough this plant was. And it bloomed beautifully every year, loaded with bees and everything else. And you know, just talk about an incredible native plant. So I don't necessarily recommend that you know, you try that for the first year. Native plants really are going to want some water, certainly when they're first planted. But it just goes to show you that many of them, once they're established, don't need any supplemental water at all. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But this is a very important food source for bees, butterflies, beneficials. The leaves nourish butterfly and moth larvae. And the birds use the dense twiggy growth for nests and just to hide underneath. Sometimes you can hear the seeds sort of popping, coming out of their capsules, and they're eaten by many types of mammals. So a really important plant. Here are 3 examples. This is a low-growing ground cover called Sentinel, Cnoth Sentinel. This is concha that has this truer blue color, a beautiful mid-size shrub, as you can see. And then there's Ray Hartman, Ceanothus Ray Hartman, a large-scale shrub, often sold as standard trees. So they prune them up so that they're just standard trees, and then they have an evergreen canopy above. Really useful plants. Great, great, great plant. Then all the Arctostaphylos, these are our Manzanitas. Very, very important native plants. They're evergreen. Here again, they come in everything from 2-inch ground covers to 20-foot trees. They bloom in winter, and that is why they are an incredibly important nectar source for butterflies, hummingbirds, and especially our native bees. It's the first plant they go to forage. So it's very important. If we lose our Manzanitas, the native bees are, many native bees are going to have a very difficult time. Most are drought tolerant and long lived. They can make excellent hedges, specimens, ground covers. They're very versatile. And like I said, they're extremely valuable for wildlife. And here again are 3 examples. Howard McMinn is widely available, beautiful when it blooms. Those white blooms against that dark bark is just so yummy. I just love that look. And then the Uva ursi is one that just stays a nice low ground cover. And here's one that's sort of a mid range size, the John Dorley. And you can see its new growth has this lovely little bronze color. You know, one of the things I love about native plants are sort of their subtle beauty. You know, they're not, oftentimes they aren't these garish, knock you over the head things. I think this is a good example. This little blush of this bronze color, on the John Dorley Manzanita, I just think is so pretty. So, all right. And then of course we have all of our gorgeous native sages, our salvia. They're easy, prolific, fragrant. I mean, there's just, you can't say any bad things about all of our sages. They're different ones that bloom in different seasons, very important food source for wildlife. The flowers contain very high quality nectar. And that's why the hummingbirds, line up in droves, literally will become territorial about some of the salvia and fight off, other hummingbirds who are trying to come in for a sip. They just love the nectar from salvia. Many of these need no or low water in summer, drought tolerant, and most are deer resistant because they have that a little bit of a pungent or really great fragrance, and deer don't like that. So we do, but they don't. And here's just a little smattering of our salvia. Such a beautiful array of plants. This one, bottom middle here, is our Salvia Apiana, the white, that really grayish whitish, very pungent when rubbed leaf. This is what the native Californians used as smudge sticks for ceremonies and so forth. Just a gorgeous plant. And finally, our Epilobium, our California fuchsia. This is a perennial. It has gray or sometimes green foliage, and then these knockout red and orange flowers. Sometimes pinks and whites. Bees and hummingbirds just flock to them. They're just wonderful. They're native to the California foothills and also some in coastal areas. They bloom in late summer and into autumn. They're the late bloomers, which is nice for to have some color that time of year in the garden. They like what we refer to as cool sun, but they will tolerate some part shade or hot sun if you give them a little water extra in summer. This is something you want to cut to the ground after the flowers are spent to encourage the next season's bloom. They go dormant in winter, and most of these don't require any water in summer, most. But again, if they're in blazing hot heat, you might want to supplement a little bit. But they're an absolutely beautiful plant. They come in a variety of, like I said, they have some different colors. An interesting little side story about this plant. I have two plants in my garden, and one of them is this Epilomium, and about maybe 20-30 feet away, I have another plant that also has gray foliage, and it has tubular red flowers like this. It's actually pretty similar. That one is the other one is a native to, I think, Uruguay or something in South America. And both beautiful plants, and they bloom about the same time. The one from Uruguay, I do get every so often, I get some, I can see bees, and I see every so often some hummingbirds going by for a sip. But the native, the one that looks the same, that is nearby, is covered with bees and all of this wildlife and so forth. And it just is so intriguing to me because they look so similar. And yet somehow this wildlife knows the difference, right? And they just flock to the natives. So I just find that so interesting. Okay, so let's talk for just a minute about caring for natives. Just like we spoke about earlier about caring for oaks, less is usually more. So let's go over to this. So don't want to use soil amendments. Most prefer lean native soil with nothing added. Sometimes at the nursery or at the supply materials yards, you can ask for clean fill. Sometimes they have soil that they've just taken out of our native hillsides, and then they just kind of run it through a screen or whatever, and you can just purchase it like that. Natives love that. Don't add fertilizer. They don't need it or want it. Don't overwater. Water regularly and deeply the first season, and avoid letting the root ball dry out. Really important. When you first plant a native plant, it really wants to be soaked. Soak it. Really don't just like spray the hose on the, on it. put the hose down, let it stay there until the whole area, a couple of feet around it, is really soaked. And then water in winter if rain is scarce. But once it's established, many of them are not going to require much or any water. Don't use pesticides. Let the plant's natural defenses and the beneficial insects provide the protection. And then watch the birds capture caterpillars to feed their young. And also don't overdo it with deadheading. I mean, we all like to be tidy in our gardens to some extent, but it's nice to leave some of those let some of the birds do the work. And now I'm just going to show a quick 2-minute, I think it's 2 or 4 minutes, just on how to plant a native plant. This is just kind of a good reminder actually on how to plant any plant, but this is especially valuable for natives. Here we go.
Now I'm going to show you how to plant a native plant. The first thing to remember is you do not want to dig the hole too deep. You want to dig the hole slightly less deep than the soil that's in the container. So for this baby St. Catherine's lace buckwheat, the soil in the container is this high. So I'm going to dig a hole slightly less deep, only that high in total. Then the next step is you want to dig it twice as wide as the container. And you want to sort of score the sides of the hole so that the roots can grab hold. You do not want to make a smooth-sided hole. It's looking just as if the plant crown is sitting slightly higher than the soil level. That's perfect to make a little plant island with a moat around it and then a berm around the moat to keep the water in. And I'm going to pour in 3 gallons of water and wait for it to completely drain out before I plant the plant. And then you also want to water the plant in the pot thoroughly before you plant it as well. Here we are a half an hour later with the hole that we filled with water. It has completely drained, so we know that we have fast draining soil. And we can plant anything, either a clay adapted plant or a plant that is adapted to fast draining soil. What you want to do is gently put your fingers like this around the stem of the plant and turn it upside down and then slip the pot off of the plant roots. Now, you can see all of these plant roots that are here on the edge. You don't want to be rough with it. Instead, you want to just gently break it apart so that the roots will spread out into the soil of the hole. So I'm just gently massaging the roots, gently breaking them up. And with most plants, you can do this. There are certain plants that will rebel if you do it and die, like Matilaha poppy. You definitely don't want to do it with Matilaha poppy and island bush poppy. But with most plants, it's just fine to be very gentle. So now I take my other hand, I flip it over, and now I set it in the hole. And I start to fill in the soil, patting it down with my knuckles to get out any air pockets. I'm making the plant be a little plant island surrounded by a moat. And now I make a berm of soil all around the moat to keep the water in. Now we'll do the test. We'll pour the water in. And if I've planted this properly, the plant should be on a little bit of an island sitting above the water that's in the moat. I think another 1/4 inch higher would have been better, just to raise that plant island up just a bit so that there was definitely no water around the stem. But this is what you want to do. Dig the hole slightly less deep than the soil in the container, twice as wide, fill it with water, let the water drain, water the plant in the pot before you plant it, and then plant and then water once again. Slightly less
Okay.
Now I'm
Whoops, whoops, there we go. Okay, so that just serves as some good reminders. Then I'm going to go through these just final slides very quickly because I'm going to leave all this information and most of the information in this little presentation in a leave behind, which I understand MMWD will mail out to everyone who's participating today. So there's lots of really great books on native plants. The Marin Master Gardener website, we have information on native plants as well as a plant list, recommended plants and so forth. And of course, there's Calscape that Dr. Talame mentioned, where you can put in your address and so forth and see what plants are native to your exact area. So great. And that's what Calscape looks like. So see, you would just go in, put in your address, and bam, all the plants native to your area are right there. Really fabulous resource. You can also filter, right? You can say, oh, I need an evergreen, it needs to have full sun, and I'd like it to be 3 to 6 feet tall and wide, or whatever. You can do that, and it'll give you the plants that meet those parameters. So handy. They also have this kind of fun little garden planner where you answer 4 questions, and it gives you a little thing, so little suggestions. So that's kind of a fun thing. And as I mentioned, the UC Marin Master Gardeners, we have a pretty extensive plant list, many plant lists on our website, and including natives. And I'll include a link to that on the follow-up resource list. And, you know, I highly recommend that you visit the Fall Cultural Center in San Rafael on Mission Avenue. The Marin Master Gardeners have a number of gardens there, including a brand new native plant garden. And I understand that all the plants there are actually native to Marin. So that is a pretty cool thing. And they're baby plants now, but you can, it's wonderful to see all the gardens that we maintain there, that we've created and help maintain there. They're just beautiful. And you can also watch the native garden grow. And of course, we have all access to all these gorgeous areas within Marin. If you want to see coastal native plants, again, this is all going to be in the resource list, so no need to jot it down. But there's just so many incredible plants and places to see in Marin, on the coast or inland. Of course, you know, from Mount Tam to Samuel P. Taylor Park, all through in Muir Woods, we just have this incredible array of natural beauty in Marin. And then to wrap up, I just want to say that I can't stress enough how important and how fun it is to bring some of that beauty home with you. And I do have just a few pictures here to wrap it up of how that's worked in my garden. So I'll just show you a few of those. Here is a classic under oak plant. There's an oak tree above this plant. It's a Heuchera, or a common name coral bells. Beautiful plant. Here you can just see some poppies that are tossed in another area of my garden. Here's one of the low growing Ceanothus, right? And by the way, here's a non-native cultivar of the Heuchera right here. You see how the leaves look the same? This is just something where they crossed it with something and they make this plant with a really interesting leaf color. So that's kind of fun. This is one of our buckwheats, beautiful easy care edging plant. This is one of our gorgeous salvias. This is the hummingbird sage. Salvia Apiana sends up these beautiful towers, and the hummingbirds come on by. It's just lovely. This is the native Achillea millefolium, or yarrow, a really lovely native plant that butterflies. See the way it has these kind of broad little landing pads? That's very useful for butterflies. They love that. And here's one of the Ceanothus. Looks like I should have done a little bit of better job pruning up here, taking off some of this, but you can see this is just overhanging a little alley next to my garden. That is my basset hound down there walking down, ready to go for a walk. And this is one of my favorites, the Manzanitas. One of the ones in my garden is called Arctostaphylos, Dr. Hurd. And that's one of the Manzanitas, the Dr. Hurd Manzanitas. really just gorgeous bark and great plant. So there you go. And if I want to encourage you, there are lots of different ways to get in touch with the Marin Master Gardeners. Our help desk is available by email or or you can also phone or come by. I don't remember exactly what our hours are now for the help desk exactly, but if you email or call, I know you can get that information. If you hold up your cell phone now, actually, to this screen, like you pretend like you're going to take a photo, but don't take a photo, just open up your, put it on camera and then hold it up to this screen. You can immediately sign up for our quarterly e-newsletter called The Leaflet. I'm the co-editor of that newsletter, and I assure you there'll be plenty of information that you'll get on native plants, as well as a host of other important home horticulture, pest management, and sustainability. Lots of content on all of those things. So that is it for me. And let's see. So I will stop this sharing, or maybe I'll leave that up for just one more second. Let's see if we have some questions here. I'm looking here.
Yeah, there's a few questions I can step in and read them out to you if you like.
Okay, sure.
So the first one that someone asked was some good recommendations for plants that go well in clay soil.
Yes.
Anything come to mind?
Yes, let's see. Whoops. Oh, so something just happened. I'm going to stop the sharing here so I can see. Here we go. Hold on. I'm sorry. One more time for clay soil, did you say?
Yeah, so just some recommendations for good plants in clay soil was the question.
Yes, in fact, we do have a pretty extensive plant list on our website that's specifically about plants that thrive in clay soil. Clay soil, you basically have two, and many of us have it, myself included, in Marin County. Clay soil is something that we deal with. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing necessarily. There are plenty of plants that thrive in clay soil, but basically if your two options are, you can either amend it to make it drain a little faster, or you can just plant plants that thrive in clay soil. And so you can get information on both of those things on their website, and I will include that in a follow-up resource.
Perfect, thank you. And then another question's kind of similar on just recommendations for plants in the shady areas of the lawn, or the yard rather.
In the yard, yeah. And we do have a shade plant list as well.
Okay.
Yeah, not necessarily all just natives, but plants that thrive in the shade. And there are native plants that thrive in shade for sure. Again, and Calscape would be a great place to do a filter on that as well. You could go in and say, yes, I need a shade plant and it needs to be X feet tall or whatever it might be, or have hot sun or whatever. And so that'd be a good place to go. And I will include that in the resource list as well.
Perfect, yeah. And so as well as Calscape, there's another question here. If there's a filter for like deer resistant plants, is that a thing that you guys have on there?
I think
Off the top
so.
of your head?
I think so. I do have a list of deer resistant plants on the site, on the Master Gardener site. We have lots of really great useful lists. So again, I'll include all those. I would imagine that's a filter on Calscape. I don't know off the top of my head, but I would imagine.
Yeah, okay.
Such a common question, right? Such a common need. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then just and that's another ones. One question about wildfire safety. I'm assuming there's a section online about plants recommendations for wildfire safety that comply with the new ordinances and all like that good stuff.
Yeah.
So
right. The Marin Master Gardeners don't have a list of good and bad plants for fire. And frankly, it doesn't really make any sense because all plants burn. Every plant on the planet burns, right? It's a natural material. It's a combustible material. What's very important is to learn about and look into defensible space, right? How to create defensible space. And one of the most important zones in defensible space is zone 0, right? And that's the 0 to 5 feet around the perimeter of your house. And that is something where, right, you don't want combustible things. You don't want something attached to your house that's combustible and so forth. But I want to stress that it's not what you plant, it's where you plant it and how it's maintained. So I'll include our link to the Fire-smart information also in the resource list.
Right, yeah, thank you so much. Unless there's any other questions, I believe I want to thank everyone else for coming. Thank you for such a great presentation. I think we should be able to wrap up here unless you have anything else, Marie.
No, I just want to thank everyone who was here and really appreciate the questions and just everybody being here and your interest in native plants, and hope you bring some of that outside beauty inside your garden. So thank you for joining us.
All right.